All right, Alexander, let's talk about the situation in Ukraine and what's going on the ground. We can talk about the south region, Kherson, and what's happening there. We can talk about Donbass, Severodonetsk, Lysychansk, the North Lugansk area. And we can also discuss the fact that Ukraine President Zelensky went to the front lines in Kherson as well. Like your thoughts there. A PR opportunity, obviously, but okay. Still, the mainstream media is saying that he did it to improve morale of the troops, and what a great leader he is for doing that. So there's a lot of stuff going on the ground, but I think the general theme is that Russia continues to grind away at the Ukrainian military. Of course, we have I don't know, has it been confirmed in the UK and the US that they are sending MLRS weapons to Ukraine? I think that's been confirmed now, or no, it hasn't. Okay.
No, okay. This is not that I've seen.
Because you get a lot of reports. Yeah, okay. So anyway, there's the talk about that as well. And that's going to be the next game changer. We've had like 10 game changers. I do think the Harpoon missiles have started to ship. I'm not sure. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct. That is absolutely correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, what's going on?
Well, let's talk about the first of all Zelensky and him going to visit the troops and raising morale and all that. Well, that's what leaders do in war. So let's be let's not be critical of him meeting his troops. Perhaps much more interesting is what he says, and he spoke in a way that suggested that things are not going well. He talked about terribly difficult times especially in Donbass. Things are not going at all well. And I thought the most interesting thing he said of all, by the way, was that, yes, we have to start negotiating with the Russians. It's the only way we can do that. And he seemed to be rather less absolutist about saying Ukraine's going to get Crimea back and Donbass back. And he seemed to accept that it would be impossible. It would cost hundreds of thousands of lives to try to retake these places. Of course, they can't retake these places. But he seemed to say, look, we have to negotiate. But in order to get ourselves into a position of negotiating, we have to start retaking territory. Now, that is an extraordinarily tall order. That's an extraordinarily big demand to make of an army that is being absolutely bruised every day and which, instead of gaining ground, appears to be losing it. Now, in the crucial battlefield, which is northern Donbass, I was getting news this morning that the Russians now control around half of Severodonetsk, and they're pressing on and capturing most of it. And it seems that, again, the Ukrainian command, the local governor have all been saying we've got to pull these troops out of this city, and we've got to pull them out of Lysychansk. The roads are almost closed. The Russian artillery is striking against them. But, we can still just about do it. We've got to do it because we need these men more than we need these cities. And it seems extraordinary, but Ukraine still says that they're not doing it. The government, the political leadership refuse to allow these troops to be withdrawn. And, when you hear what Zelensky says, that we've got to start regaining territory rather than losing it before we can talk, well, that, I suppose, is the reason why they're making these extraordinary stand and fight orders, even though they are, I think, playing directly into Russian hands. And can I just quickly add, as a historical aside, many people know, who are familiar with their history, that during the Second World War, the German political leadership was repeatedly giving orders to its soldiers to stand and fight. And it was also justifying it and rationalizing it for the same reasons. Right up almost to the very end, the German leadership were telling their people, look, we're not totally averse to negotiations, but we need to be able to negotiate from a position of strength. So what we've got to do is we've got to inflict a major defeat on our enemies, the Allies and the Russians, and only then will we even consider sitting down to talk. If you read the conferences that take place in German headquarters, which I have done, you will find that this kind of rationalization was made all the time. That's just a historical aside. So that's why they're standing and fighting. That's why they're losing horrendously, why their soldiers are dying, why many of their soldiers are protesting about this. And we see these attempts to nibble away at Russian positions that the Ukrainians are trying to do. They're trying to mount these counteroffensives. So 2 weeks ago, we had the great counteroffensive in and around Kharkiv. That went forward. Now it's been pushed all the way back. We now have news that Kharkiv itself is being shelled again, when the whole rationale of that offensive was not only to end the shelling of Kharkiv, but to push the Russians all the way back beyond their own border. That's all gone into reverse. And now we've had an attack and another attempted attack in Kherson region. And the Ukrainians have been saying that went successfully, except we get information from the Russians and we're getting what looked to be reliable video evidence that far from going successfully, the offensive was thrown back with heavy losses. And going back again to what the Germans were saying to their people and to their army in the run-up to the end of the Second World War, we're going to turn it around with all these wonder weapons that are going to start appearing. And Ukraine, to some extent, is doing the same thing. So we have the M777 howitzers with the Excalibur missiles, which use GPS. Problem is, the Russians are jamming GPS. Now we have the Harpoon missiles, which are going to drive the Russian fleet from the Black Sea. Except the Russians know all about Harpoon missiles, and anyway, they use submarines and aircraft, and they have much more advanced missiles than the Harpoon missile that can be used to strike Ukrainian ships and Ukrainian forces. So I don't see that this changes fundamentally anything. And then, of course, now we have the multiple rocket launcher systems. They're going to change the entire battlefield. Problem is, Ukraine has had plenty of multiple rocket launcher systems. It's not clear that these American ones are actually that superior. They can launch, apparently, some guided missiles, which the Soviet and Russian multiple rocket launcher systems don't do. But then Ukraine has had guided missiles. So, it doesn't obviously provide a new capability. And just to say it, Jacob Dreisen did a really good program about this, which you can find on Rumble. And he pointed out that the problem anyway with supplies of multiple rocket launcher systems is that they eat ammunition, if they're going to be used at all effectively, at a simply prodigious rate. And the Ukrainian logistical system, and indeed probably the American logistical system for this kind of war, simply can't cope with that. So, it's debatable that the Ukrainians can use these multiple rocket launcher systems in to anything like the kind of capabilities that people are saying, and there are probably not going to be that many of them supplied, if they are supplied at all, and I haven't yet seen clear confirmation that they are being supplied, and I'm getting reports that the Pentagon itself is apparently opposed to this idea. So, wonder weapons, talk of counteroffensives. The reality is Ukraine is losing the war, and the sooner they accept that and are realistic about this and sit down and negotiate, the better for them it will be. Because instead of turning things round, the danger is that they will end up, just like the Germans did in 1945, with a total collapse, rather than, having turned the things around in the way that they hoped.
It seems to me that the orders that Zelensky has received from DC, from, say, Newland, Blinken, Sullivan, all these people that are stage managing this war, the orders he's received are not so much to win this thing, if that's even possible. I think they may have even told Zelensky and his administration that they've lost, they can't win. But instead of saying you've lost and you can't win, so negotiate a peace, it seems that the orders he's received are you've lost, you can't win. Now lie and gaslight the soldiers so that you can keep them fighting and delaying and holding out as much as humanly possible. And my question is, why do they want to prolong this as much as possible? Because that's what it seems that Zelensky is trying to do, and he knows it. I don't know. Something tells me inside that he knows he is misleading his military, and the objective is not a successful counteroffensive. It's not trying to create some sort of stalemate situation. It's not about even winning, which I think everyone knows that they're not going to win now, everyone. But it's more about, let's just prolong this another week, another month, maybe 2 months if we're lucky. What is the Biden administration, what are Victoria Nuland, Sullivan, Blinken, what are they hoping for? What are they aiming for? What are they angling for in the next month or two that will give them some sort of a victory or off-ramp or something? I'm trying to figure out what's their angle in trying to get this delay going and trying to extend it as much as possible. What are they hoping for?
Right, I think they're hoping for one of two things. Firstly, I mean, they're hoping that something will turn up, which is what people who are in a desperate situation often do. Because remember, if you're talking about Biden, I mean, his entire reputation now is completely tied to the war in Ukraine. There was even an absolutely lunatic article in The Guardian by Simon Tisdall, who is one of our most bizarre commentators, in my opinion, who actually said that the reason Putin has started this war in Ukraine and is waging it is because he wants to destroy Biden's reputation so that he can bring back Donald Trump. I mean, crazy stuff. But it is, within that lunacy, there is that kernel of truth that Biden's reputation now is completely tied to this war. So, you hope that something will turn up. And you're getting all kinds of weird and wonderful things starting to appear as they clutch around, clutch for straws. So you got the story about the T-62 tanks. Do you remember the T-62 tanks? The obsolete Soviet-era tanks in the 1960s. The Russians are so short of tanks now that they have to dust out these relics, these from the 1960s, to deploy them in Donbass because, they've lost so many tanks. The trouble is, it seems some of those pictures were actually taken in Syria. They were not actually in Russia. And it seems that there are not Russian tanks being moved to Ukraine. And, well, again, Jacob Dreisen did a good report about this. And, I mean, he basically debunked that particular story. And then, only this morning I was reading about, how the Russians were running out of chips. Do you remember the business about chips? Russia hasn't got chips. They're running out of chips. They're taking them out of refrigerators, supposedly. They're going through Russia, cranking open refrigerators, pulling out the chips so that presumably they can put them in cruise missiles. Well, the reason you get these stories, which are fantasy stories, and I mean, they're just complete nonsense, is because, as I said, it's a sign of desperation. It's a sign that people sense that things are not going their way, but they clutch at straws. But I think that there is another reason, which is a more rational one. And here, I'm afraid, the big cynic in me comes into play. I wonder whether the real object is to keep this thing running now as long as possible in the hope that we can get the midterms out of the way before the collapse in Ukraine comes, so that we can hold on to as much of the House and as much of the Senate as we can, perhaps hold off the possibility of an impeachment, which would be a disaster for the Democrats. I think political considerations, domestic political considerations in the United States are now the overriding factor.
You're actually saying that they believe, the Biden White House and these neocon forces, that they actually believe, neoliberal forces as well, that they can keep this this Ukraine project from collapsing all the way up to November 2022. They actually believe they can prevent the Zelensky regime from collapsing up until the midterms. That's maybe. I don't know.
Hard job. I mean, I don't know whether they believe it, but perhaps they hope it. But of course, what they're trying to do is that they're trying to buy themselves time in the meantime to turn it round and to blame the Republicans for the debacle. And already you can see, I mean, you remember that there was that editorial in the New York Times, which caused a lot of a buzz last week about, and one of the things was, that the Republicans, that there's opposition to the war growing amongst Republicans. So, if there's going to be a collapse in Ukraine, it's not due to us. We did everything we could. But, it's Marjorie Taylor Greene and all of these people coming together. The Heritage Foundation has now changed its opinions. They're coming together. They're stopping us doing all the things that we could do. They are still working alongside Putin. Going back to that Simon Tisdall article, which is in The Guardian. But remember, The Guardian is widely read amongst Democrats and often reflects their thinking. The Republicans, they're still in league with Putin. Trump is still colluding with Putin. Putin started this war to discredit Biden. And the Republicans are helping him do it by preventing plucky, heroic Ukraine from going on fighting and gaining its victory. So, always with these people, managing the narrative is the single most important thing. So I suspect there's a big element of that. And as I said, if you can keep it going till the midterms, well, you can live in hope.
Yeah. I want to make one correction as to what I said, and I want your thoughts on that. I said the Biden White House, the neocons and the neoliberals. I think that's 100% correct that the Biden White House, the DNC Democrats, and the neoliberals, their goal is to prolong this in order to prevent Zelensky collapse, so that they can blame it on the Republicans and perhaps save some seats in Congress and the Senate. That I completely believe. So their goal is, let's prolong this for as long as we can so that we can not suffer such a huge defeat in the midterms, or at least create a narrative shift to blame this on Rand Paul and Marjorie Taylor Greene and the Heritage Foundation and all of these supposedly conservative forces. Neoliberals, Biden White House, yes. I said neocons.
Yeah.
Could the neocons have a different reason to want to prolong this war? Maybe for military spending. I'm hearing that Raytheon has gotten a ton more contracts to produce Stingers and just all kinds of stuff by 2026. They're making a boatload of money. But perhaps the neocon goal is geopolitical, in that they're saying, keep Germany down, keep Russia out, keep the U.S. in. Let's destroy Europe. Let's make Europe 100% dependent on us. Let's then refocus. Let's try to drag this out as we refocus to China. I mean, maybe they're thinking in terms of a more geopolitical way to benefit from trying to prolong this as much as possible.
I think that's exactly right. I mean, I think the neocons. You're quite right, by the way. They are a distinct group. I mean, the neocons. They are. Most of them at the moment are Democrats. So you do find still some neocons who self-identify as Republicans, but they are a discrete political group. They have their own agendas, which are different from those of, say, the Democratic Party. They may be in alliance with it, but they're not the same as the Democratic Party. And they do have this bigger agenda. And you're absolutely right. Smash Europe, subordinate Europe, increase military spending. And the point about that $40 billion package, if you drill into it, we've discussed it, most of it is to increase spending, not for Ukraine. Military spending, not for Ukraine. It's military spending to boost the US military itself. There's this massive deal for Stinger missiles, for example, which, even though they've been proved, shall we say, less effective than many expected in Ukraine itself, They still make huge amounts of money for Raytheon. So Raytheon's now just landed this massive deal to make more of these Stinger missiles, and there'll be more of them. There'll be, so if we're going to send more M777 howitzers to Ukraine with their very expensive Excalibur shells, which cost $63,000 a piece, $63,000 a shell. Well, we sent, so 1,000 of these things to Ukraine. Well, it all multiplies. And bear in mind, we've got costs now. We got inflation. So, of course, the military, Raytheon or whoever it is who makes these things, actually, I believe it's BAE Systems. But, they've got to increase the price to be able to afford to supply us with these expensive Excalibur missiles. It was $63,000 in 2016, apparently, but now, let's say it's $250,000. They're going to make huge amounts of money this way. And it all swishes and swirls round the think tanks, the neocon think tanks. Theocon officials do very well out of this. So, of course, do many, many people within the political system. And, of course, beyond that, you've got the greater geopolitical prize. You keep Europe down, you keep Russia distracted, and then you focus on China. And we can see that this is what they're doing increasingly. It's just exactly what you said.
All right, different agendas, but the same goal, which is to try and prolong this as much as possible.
Absolutely.
At the expense of Ukraine men on the front lines.
The only people who worry about people in Ukraine are people who watch this program.
All right, we will leave it there. The Duran.locals.com and go to the Duran shop. 10% off. Use the code GOODDAY. Take care.